Thank you. So my thought when I did this after pinball closed, as Gary said, I was working in the slot machine department at Williams, and there were a bunch of us, me and Bill Grupp, who wrote software for some games, and Ted Estes were all in an operating system group for slots. And after pinball closed, and everybody, there was a period of time where the day that they closed, everybody got sent home and said, "Come back in a week and you can get your stuff." And me and Ted and Bill were sitting around on an empty floor, basically, kind of crying in our soup, as it were. And I thought about growing up in Chicago and how I used to drive by the plant as a pinball fan and had no idea what went on in there or who any of the people were, and how there were a lot of people who were sort of behind the scenes who nobody really knew about, who were working on pinball. And so what I did was once I went in on a Saturday afternoon and I just shot video walking all along the floors on pinball engineering, and then throughout the weeks as people were cleaning out their offices, I took pictures of all of the people who worked in engineering that I could find sitting in their offices, and put this movie together. It's kind of a movie/slideshow, and I did this once before with Cameron Silver at California Extreme, and we just sort of showed it and told tall tales and reminisced about things, and I'll do the same thing here. And then if Steve wants to chime in with any stories or whatever, if you want to make some stuff up.
Well, I just want to make it clear that I was not at Williams at this time, but I still had pretty close contact with everyone there.
We'll see your old office.
We will.
Yes.
Really?
So I'll get this started. I will probably periodically pause as I babble on. Originally, I had planned on using a lot of this footage for a documentary that I was starting to shoot about the last days of pinball, and eventually I got together with Greg Miletic, and he put together the documentary Tilt that you've all seen at this point. But we were working together for a while, and I was going to call my film 3401 after the address of pinball engineering, 3401 North California Avenue. So this area is what we traditionally called the bottom of the stairs, and when pinball games were about to go out on test, we would stick them at the bottom of the stairs, and you had to go up those stairs to get to pinball engineering, and everybody would come down here and play the games, and they usually had notepads on them, and you would write notes about what you thought about the games, and they would get audits on them and stuff like that. But in a lot of ways, it was kind of the pinball engineering water cooler, too. We would sit down there and hang out and talk and, gossip about what was going on and how long we thought we'd all have jobs and all of that kind of thing while we all sat around and waited for Lyman to finish whatever he was doing. And it was really cool. It was a really communal area. Later, when I went to work for Pat Lawler, it was just four of us in an office, and I really missed that interfacing that we had with a large group of people with really strong opinions, and it was just sort of four of us locked in a cage. And the bottom of the stairs was a really cool place to hang out and talk and yell and scream. And there was a Gophers down there for a while that suffered much abuse at the hands of various people, to the point at which its coin door was concave from having been kicked so often. I remember one time the IT department was on the other side of that wall, and one time me and Lyman and I think Keith Johnson were having a rather spirited game of Gophers, and it turned out they were trying to do a job interview on the other side of the wall, and somebody from IT had to come out and lay the smack down on us and tell us to shut our mouths. So that area was really cool. The first time I ever went in this building was Ted Estes took me and a friend of ours, Don Coons, in to the bottom of the stairs to play Congo, which was about to go out on test at the time. And I remember looking at the stairs and being a little wistful about what went on up there. And that was really my first thoughts about getting into the pinball industry. So as we go down this hall, at the back of the hall, there was the sound department. This is Dan Forden, who is one of our very talented sound designers. He did sound music most memorably for Attack from Mars, and he's done some work for Stern as well. And this is Eric Prisby. He was one of the late-coming sound engineers. He did music for Star Wars Episode 1, but mostly after that, he went into the slot department. There are three sound designers who are not there. There was Dave Zabriskie, who was the head of the sound department. His work goes all the way back to Gottlieb, and he did a lot of the early Premiere games. There was John Hay, who also went way back. He did sound going back as far as Doctor Who and even earlier, I think. And then Vince Ponarelli, who was a really wacky character, really kind of a wild rock and roll guy, and he, I think his first game was Corvette. He did World Cup Soccer and a lot of games for Midway. I couldn't find pictures of those guys, sadly enough. All really great, talented, cool guys. This was the Whitewood Lab. When we built up Whitewoods, which were the first built-up playfields that we did for games, that were built up in here, and this was kind of another cool hangout place that we went to find out what was going on. The guy who ran the Whitewood Lab, Jim Sherd, that's him on the left right there, was kind of he was kind of like Morgan Freeman in the Shawshank Redemption. He was the guy who you went to get things. He was the guy who always had the things that you need. And so if you needed parts, that's his office. It was just filled with junk and just pinball detritus. He still works there. He still works for Williams in slots. And if you ever needed parts for a game, or you needed a wiring harness made or anything like that, you could go down there and get it. And he was a really cool guy, and he loves pinball dearly. He worked at Alvin G originally, was his first pinball job. That's a little dark from this side. I don't know if you guys can see what's going on there. So here we're heading up to the stairs to Pinball Engineering. You can see there are some back glasses on the wall there. We were really worried that a lot of it was just going to disappear into a closet somewhere, which eventually is exactly what happened. And it all is buried in warehouses by Gene Cunningham and that guy Wayne in Australia somewhere. What's this? This is the electrical engineering lab. These guys were kind of rocket scientists. They're the guys who built the boards and the electrical components that went to the games. The guy who ran the electrical engineering lab was named Chuck Blake. He's working at Midway now, I believe. Just rows and rows and rows. It was like the world's biggest Radio Shack, kind of, or the world's biggest Fry's. It's just tons and tons and tons of electrical components, and those guys would sit in there soldering all day. I have no concept of how those guys do that stuff. It's complete rocket science to me. That's Chuck Blake, who was in charge of electrical engineering. This is Brad Hume, who was hired as an electrical engineer to do the new Pinball 2000 electronics, and of course he was laid off. I don't know what happened to him after that. I believe Chuck is still working for Williams or Midway at this point. So you'd head down this hall, and there was a set of offices on the right, and this is where my first office was, and this was also where they had the lockdown area for when they did Star Wars Episode 1. When they did Star Wars, Lucas was very, very, very strict about who did and didn't have access to the collateral material. I mean, they had scripts back there. They had video clips back there that they were working on for the games. And so they had this area that only members of the design team were allowed to enter, and their badges were coded specially for that. And there's a famous story one time of Neil Nicastro, who was the CEO of Williams, came up to the floor and wanted to go back and see what was going on with the game. And John Papaduke, who is a somewhat sheepish, arty guy, kind of had to put him back and say, no, you're not on the approved list. You can't go back there. We're all going to get sued if you go back there. And Neil, who was a very gruff businessman, was like, let me back that fucking room, John. And John wouldn't do it, and so Neil had to go down and sign the thing and send it off to Lucas and get him approved to do the thing, and it was all very amusing. We all had a good chuckle about it. And none of us, other than the people on the team, there were like maybe 10 people who were allowed to go back here during this period, and they had the big sign up and Spicoli and whatnot. Many people will claim that that's part of the reason that, a lot of people aren't a big fan of that game and wish we could have all had a little more input and seen what was going on. There's John holding a lightsaber back in that area. That's Duncan Brown, who I'm sure many of you know. He's a very popular pinball enthusiast. Those guys in the suits back there, that's actually John Papaduke on the upper right and Kevin O'Connor, who is a pinball artist, on the left. When they, if you guys have seen the game, there's a final mode where Darth Maul and the young Obi-Wan have a lightsaber battle. And when they did that, they put these two guys in these suits and took them over to Midway to their motion capture studio. And they waved their arms around and did motion capture and turned it into the 3D art for Star Wars Episode 1. And that was shot after that all happened. So the guys in the game who you see are actually John and Kevin. And that's Cameron Silver on the lower left, famed pinball programmer. Super nice guy from Australia. He worked on Scared Stiff and Star Wars Episode 1 and Circus Voltaire. Really good guy. Really knew how to program a lamp effect. These are some sort of shots of some mock-ups from when they were working on Star Wars Episode 1. John really liked to do a lot of stuff with foam core where he'd take markers out and mock stuff up and build up foam core pieces and stuff. We'll see some more of that later. When he left about a dozen foam core pieces in his office. Some shots of the whiteboard from when they were working on Episode 1 there. I can't really see where we're going now. This heads now back to the art department. The art department, and you're going to hear me say this over and over, the art department was a really cool place. It was, again, mass chaos. Those guys were nuts. They would go back there and do their thing. And again, you can see that there's just stuff scattered everywhere. It wasn't always quite this bad, but of course this was after they closed and people were starting to pack stuff up and whatnot. A lot of this stuff got destroyed or lost. I've heard that there are a lot of playfield screens that are missing at this point and nobody really knows what happened to them, and a lot of original artwork. On the other side of this board, there was a whiteboard in which various artists would take to themselves to draw whatever came upon their minds up on the board, which was often the most vile and obscene and disgusting things you could ever possibly imagine. Williams HR, thankfully, was never present up on engineering, and it was interesting to say the least. Those guys were one of a kind. Everybody at Williams loved their job so much, and we're all so happy to be there. Even me, just to be around it. I never got to work on pinball while I was there, but it was just so cool to be among so many talented, dedicated people. That's Greg Ferris. He was the leader of the art department. He's done art for games going all the way back to the 70s for Bally. His office was filled with tons and tons of history and tons of cool stuff. He's working at at Midway now and doing some freelancing. This is Paul Barker. He was our kind of production manager for getting playfields made and screens printed and things like that. This is Adam Ryan. He was a dot matrix artist. He kind of disappeared after pinball, and at Pat Lawler Design, we hunted him down, and he did a lot of dot matrix art for the PLD games. This guy got hired for Pinball 2000 to do 3D art. His name was David something. I can't remember now. This guy's also name was David Muller. He was hired also to do Pinball 2000. I believe both those guys landed at Midway after things got done. This was something I found the other day that I just threw in here because I didn't have any other place to put it. But I don't know how many of you know about the third Pinball 2000 game was going to be called Wizard Blocks. And it was a game designed by Pat Lawler. And I found this photo that I had taken when the first artwork got back from John Yowsey. He did his first marker print. He did his first marker drawing, and I took a picture of it because I really loved it. John was one of the greatest pinball artists. He was so good. He's done. He did Twilight Zone, and he did Addams Family, and he did Roadshow. He's done a lot of Pat's games, a lot of other games. A fantastic pinball artist. And I thought this looked really great. I was really excited about Pat's game, and then of course it never got made, and we've all seen pieces of it on YouTube at this point because Gene's got it, and I think I've heard rumor that this art disappeared somewhere along the way. It's gone, but apparently Wayne's been selling printouts of them on eBay, so he must have gotten I hear he found a playfield scan on a hard drive in the stuff that he got from Williams. It's somewhere along the line, so that's kind of discouraging, but that would have been a really cool game. I'm really sad it didn't get made. That's going. Oh, that's just more of this. It's the original photo I took wasn't that good, and it was from far away, but you can kind of get the idea of things. I always almost kind of like John's marker drawings better than the cool. I mean, the stuff that he did was so polished, and this stuff has a certain roughness to it that I always enjoyed. He always did those big flaming starbursts. They're really cool. I can't. Man, that's really dark. I think this was all footage of what the art department looked like after everybody moved out. It's probably just as well we can't see it very well because it was kind of depressing and empty. One of the things that happened after everybody was gone and packed up was that a lot of the areas that were for pinball got kind of torn out and redone, and some ugly cubicles, which you'll see along the way here, got put in, and they moved a lot of finance and accounting up onto the floor. I wonder, oh, well, I'll just go, we're out. And so now we're really heading into the main area of pinball engineering here, or what was pinball engineering. Here you can see this was after all the accounting guys moved in. There used to be cubes there still, but they weren't nearly as industrial. It was all much rougher. This is Elaine Johnson. She was in charge of bill of materials at Williams, and she was kind of like a database of parts. You could walk up to Elaine and say, what was the part number for the ramp switch on high speed 2, the getaway, and she would just rattle it off. She was totally amazing. She had been working at Williams for over 20 years. And she was really cool, and she went to to Midway after things closed. And then across the hall from her was Karen Tribula, who'd been doing manuals at Williams forever. I found, I was going through some discs after everything got shut down, and I found little floppy disks for the Mac for Black Knight and Firepower and things like that for the manuals. She'd been around forever. This was Larry's office. Larry, of course, pinball legend. He had already left Williams at this point. He left right after Revenge from Mars was created, but he has a vast history going all the way back to when him and Eugene Jarvis created Defender and Robotron, and then he programmed Black Knight with Steve. That's right.
Yeah,
and
high speed.
And Firepower too, or was that?
No, he wasn't there for Firepower. Eugene was Firepower.
Oh, okay. And then a wide variety of all of the great games over the years: Bonsai Run and Funhouse and Addams Family. He's an amazing guy. He was an amazing guy to work for. He did so much for pinball engineering, just keeping management out of our hair. He was probably the best manager I've ever worked for in my life. This was Jim Patla, who was the other sort of head of the floor, and he had a long, vast history going all the way back to the Bally days. He came over to Williams when Bally got bought, and he designed a couple of games, I believe, at Bally. There was one in particular whose name is Matahari. Yes, thank you. That water sign is on the floor because there was a flood. This is John Crutch, who was a very famous pinball mechanical engineer. He is responsible for all of the coolest pinball toys in the world. I think one of the first things that he did was the screw motorcycle racing thing in Bonsai Run, and then he also designed Rudy on Funhouse, and he designed the slot machine and the power field for Twilight Zone. He's a great guy. He's very smart. You could give him any problem, and he would walk away with all of his machines and his little toys and stuff, and come back later and hand you a set of plans, and it would all work. He was very, very, very smart. He went to work with Pat at Pat Lawler Design, and it was great working with him there. Over on the right, this guy was also a mechanical engineer. His name was Ben. I have forgotten his last name. I think the most notable, he came late in the game. He worked on Cactus Canyon, I believe. When engineering was in here before they filled this up with accounting and whatnot, a lot of these cubes that were over on the right were sort of temporary holding places for people. Everybody at Williams had an office, which was great and rare in this day and age. And there were some cubes over there for when offices were full and people couldn't fit and stuff like that, and random gathering places and whatnot. And so this is really the door that gets into where all of the software guys and designers worked. The first time I came through here when I was interviewing, it was amazing. This is Jack Scallon. He was a mechanical engineer. He worked on a lot of John Papaduke's games, and he had been at Williams for a long time. He stayed at Williams there. That's just a photo of Cameron that I had that was funny because he was just walking up the hallway. He was doing his thing. But one of the noteworthy things here is this whiteboard on the right, which was sort of where all the software guys wrote there. Not quite as vile as the art guys' things, but still not necessarily the nicest stuff. But the thing that I can just barely see over there was the caption contest, and Louis Koziarz every week would find some random photo out of some magazine or newspaper and hang it up there and write new caption contest, and everybody would write their own captions under there, and they were often incredibly amusing and or disturbing. So this hall over here, that door right there, was my last office at Williams. This door was one of our OS engineers for slots. His name was Mark Free. And then then we went up to Ted's office. This is Ted Estes, of course, famed pinball software engineer. He worked on Twilight Zone and Roadshow. His office was filled with back glasses. Super, super nice guy. I loved working for him. He's done a lot for the hobby over the years.
Mention Uncle Willie?
Oh, that's right. And on the pinball website, on the Williams website, there was a feature that appeared periodically called Ask Uncle Willie, and people would send in their questions about pinball and the pinball industry and pinball collecting, and they would be answered by this fictional character named Uncle Willie, who, if anybody doesn't know at this point, was Ted. He used to answer all of those and put them up on the website and post them to Rec Games Pinball. In later years, I think the last couple were Duncan, and I had volunteered to take that over after Duncan did the last one, but it became a moot point. So, and then outside we had Pete Piotrowski's office. He was one of the He did a lot. Well, first of all, he designed the Champion Pub, and then he was designing the fourth Pinball 2000 game with Scott Slomiani. And he did a lot for the Pinball 2000 design period in terms of the cabinet design and the changes in the lockdown bar and stuff like that. A really good mechanical engineer. He's working at Incredible Technologies now in Illinois. And then this next office on the left was John's Papaduke's office when he wasn't tied up in the lockdown area for Star Wars Episode 1. He had this big office with that drawing table and his markers, and he loved sitting there and mucking stuff up. And he really loved old Bally EM games, and he used to love digging through the archives and finding all sorts of old mechanical drawings and things. These are some of those foam core mock-ups I was telling you about. You can see that on the left there's the genie from Tales of the Arabian Night, and on the right was the trunk from Theater of Magic. All sorts of, he used to love putting stuff together with foam core and making it work. I don't know where John ended up now. Do you know where John is, Gary?
I think he's working for that Zizzle.
Oh, Zizzle, yes, that's right. He designed that little Pirates of the Caribbean game. Yeah, that's right. This, of course, is a pinball legend, Steve Kordek. He is the man who first put two flippers at the bottom of the game to make them run. He is an incredibly nice guy. Really, he's, I think, 95 now. He still gets around. He's a 95-year-old guy, but I mean, he'll still sit and talk to you about the old days, and he loves pinball from the bottom of his heart, and he still comes to Pinball Expo every year. Super sweet guy. Somebody once asked me what he did at Williams, and from the time that I was there, my answer was he sat in his office and was respected. And because he wasn't really, I mean, people would come to him and ask him questions and take his advice about game, but really he was just hanging around being Steve. He was
Also, he was the archivist. I mean,
that's absolutely true, yeah. And he had actually, and we tried to get this stuff out so hard, and I don't know where it ended up. He had some file cabinets with old drawings from old Williams EM games that were hand-drawn by Harry Williams with his signature on them and stuff. We have no idea where that stuff ended up. I was talking to Duncan about it recently. Is it?
yeah.
Oh, well, that's good. Because for a while, Steve was not necessarily treated the best after pinball closed, and he was kind of shuffled out, and a lot of that stuff got left behind. And I'm glad that it managed to survive somewhere. Steve also had the Pinball Circus, which I think is at the Pinball Hall of Fame right now. I think that was his. Super nice guy. Love him to death. Designed so many games over the years, so many old EM games for Williams. That's him and John posing for a photo there. So heading down, we'll take a right here, and on the right we have the office of Graham West, I believe, is coming up next. Yes, that's Graham. Graham came to Williams from England and worked on Junkyard and was working on the famed Williams redesign and re-release of Big Bang Bar, which I don't know how public that knowledge is, but Williams had taken all of the designs and everything for Big Bang Bar and was porting it over to the Williams operating system and DCS and was going to remake it. And they actually had a Whitewood running, which I think is the Whitewood in this photo, and software running that was almost done, and then the project got canned when the Pinball 2000 thing came to light. Graham's a super nice guy. I'm still in touch with him. He's down on the West Coast where he works for a company doing one of the multiplayer RPG games. That was what he drew on his whiteboard on the last day, 10/25/99, the last day of Pinball. Black Monday, we called it. All of us came back from Pinball Expo really high and really raring to go, and everybody got fired. It was not a good day. Over here on the left, we'll have Pat Lawler's office. Of course, Pat, another pinball legend. He designed so many great games. His office always looked like that. And he's obviously not in the best mood today. But after pinball closed and I quit, I kind of wandered around the tech industry for a while, and we had a Williams lunch around our Christmas time about a year later, and Pat was complaining about how he couldn't get his game done in time because him and Lewis were overwhelmed. And I said, Pat, if you ever need another software guy, let me know. And I worked for Pat for about 3 years. On the first game I worked on was Monopoly, and then Roller Coaster Tycoon, and Ripley's Believe It or Not in NASCAR. And those were good times. Pat lived about an hour and a half away from where I lived in the city, out in this little town in Illinois called Marengo, and we worked out of his house for a while before he got an office. Obviously, still working, just did Family Guy. Not much more you can say about him. He loves pinball. He's still. I like the fact that he's still doing a lot. I think a lot of people kind of. He's still doing interesting things. He's still trying to play with his playfield designs, and I think that's great. There's this sort of back hallway here, which we're going to walk down now, in which a lot of files and things were held before we go to the other main hallway of pinball engineering. But one key thing about this hallway was that for a long time, Williams Pinball was a smoking building, even well after many public buildings became non-smoking, and we all had smoking offices. And for a long time, this was sort of a smoking collector's area. And I heard a story once about a Lyman setting a fire outside your office.
Yeah, he put out his cigarette butt and a big pile of cigarette butts, and they all started, burning in the stairwell.
Uh-huh.
An alarm went off, and the fire department was called automatically, but somebody intercepted it in time to put it out, and
That's
not
good.
have them come.
There was actually an ashtray attached to the wall outside where your office was, right?
There was one there too.
Yeah.
Nasty habit.
Nasty habit, says the man who still smokes. So we go down this back hallway, and this office on the left was yours, right, Steve?
So George stole it then.
That's right. Yes, this was George's office. That's George Gomez, of course, who designed Corvette and Monster Bash and was one of the main architects, along with Pat, of the Pinball 2000 project. But that was your office down that back hallway, right, Steve?
I'm wondering where it was taken from.
This photo?
What did he just say?
Where this photo was taken from?
Yes, where was this picture taken from?
From the doorway to that. Actually, you know what? This photo was taken from the doorway of.
His old office.
That's from his old office. That's right. And I just dropped it in here because I didn't have any other photos from him.
And I
Yeah.
had a mansion.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. That's actually correct. George was really the brain trust and brainchild behind Pinball 2000, and he was kind of crushed after that got shut down. But he works at Midway now, doing. He's a producer for video games. When I first went, well, I'll tell that later. That's him and Pat at the Hollow Pin. This was the thing that they disappeared for about a month in Pat's garage and put together this mock-up of the Pinball 2000 game called the Hollow Pin. And the first time and when they brought it in, and I remember Tom Eubank, who was one of the software guys, came to me and was trying to draw and explain to me what it was, and I had no idea what he was talking about. And the first time they turned that on and you shot a ball and it hit something on the video screen and disappeared, I knew that was it. It was totally amazing to experience for the first time. It was really cool. Really, really heady times around then there. Everybody had a lot of hope. And kind of dreams around that. This is Duncan. He standing in this office here, and the reason all of his stuff is packed up in this office is because just before Pinball Expo, he had moved out of his office in the lockdown area for Star Wars Episode 1 and moved all of his stuff into this new office the Friday before Pinball Expo. And then, of course, he came back on Monday and got fired and never even got the chance to unpack.
Shortly after this picture was taken, he was arrested by the tall hair police.
Duncan is a pinball collecting maniac. He works for Larry DeMar now over at Larry's Slot Machine Design Company. He spends a lot of time on eBay snatching up pinball stuff. He also built his own biodiesel car and wanders around to fast food joints stealing their grease to brew his own biodiesel. This is Cameron Silver. I introduced him earlier, but he worked back here. He's a super great guy. I'm still in touch with him a lot. He's working at Raw Thrills in Chicago doing video games. They just released a kind of karaoke video game cabinet themed around American Idol, which is actually a really cool thing. I look forward to seeing that. And then back here on the right, we are going to be at Dwight's office. Dwight Sullivan worked on a ton of games with Steve, High Speed 2, Star Trek, Riverboat Gambler? Was that yours? I can't remember. Terminator 2, that's right.
Since we did Terminator 3.
Yeah.
Working on another one.
Dwight is very creative. He is very energetic. He's kind of a maniac. He's really great to have around because he has lots and lots of ideas. He always comes up with new ideas. 90 out of 100 of them might be just crap, but you'll just say to him, "Nah, Dwight, that's stupid." And he'll be like, "Okay, well then how about this?" He's always excited about everything. He loves games of all types. He loves board games. He loves to play board games and stuff with his kids. Super, super nice guy working at Stern now. Last game he did was Pirates of the Caribbean, I think. He's working with you on on your next game?
Yes.
Very cool. He also had a Defender over here, which we spent a lot of time playing, but which was gone by the time of this photo. Yes. Dwight, at one point, there were a lot of extra Star Trek The Next Generation stickers left, sidebox stickers. And Dwight, at some point, took a huge pile of them and plastered his door with them. And so he had this door, and it was covered with Picards. And when we moved, Jim Patla came to Dwight and said, "I'm surprised you didn't take your door," because he had this Star Trek door. And Dwight said, "Well, can I?" And Jim's like, "Yeah, sure." And so in order to get anything out of Williams, you had to have a property pass. And so one of the managers would have to take a property pass and write out what you were taking out, and you'd hand it to the security guy on the way out the door, and you could go. And so Jim Patla made a property pass for Dwight, and it said one door on it, and gave it to Dwight, and Dwight took the door off his hinges and took it home, and now he's going to put it up in his game room, on the door to his game room. So Dwight has this door at his house now, which is really great. Top to bottom, nothing but Picard. And then on the other side of the corner, here, I believe. We have Lyman's office. That's Lyman Sheets, of course, world pinball champion 3 times, and software engineer for some of the great games, Attack from Mars, Medieval Madness, and Monster Bash. And Spider-Man, right?
We'll talk about that.
Oh, later today, that's right. I have great memories of this office because when I first started at Williams, Monster Bash was in production. I had known Lyman for years. And so every day at 5 o'clock, I used to come back to Lyman's office, and me and Lyman and Vince Ponarelli, and when he started a few months after me, Keith Johnson, and we'd play the Monster Bash Whitewood, and we would just play, and we came up with all these little sayings like somebody would be playing and be like, "Oh, that ball wants out so bad," and it'd be bouncing around, and when you'd hit he spent a lot, probably about a third of the time on Monster Bash programming the Phantom Flip thing, trying to make it work right, and for a long time it did not work very well at all. I mean, it doesn't work great now, but for a long time it was really bad, and so whenever it got lit, he'd be like, "Oh, your stinky blue friend is here," because the lights for the Phantom Flip are blue, and everybody just wanted to avoid Phantom Flip for a long time. And a lot of the quotes that we all used to say to each other ended up getting used in that Lyman's Lament mode in Monster Bash, and we all went down there one day and recorded Lyman giving off all the quotes that we played. God, I probably have better memories of the development of Monster Bash, a game I wasn't involved in at all, than I do for any of the games I actually worked on. It was so much fun. It was right after I started, and it was really cool. Lyman's working at Stern now, of course, and I had hoped until a few weeks ago, I had thought that he was going to be here as a guest, as my surprise guest to join me for this presentation, but he had to cancel at the last minute, sadly. They're all very busy. They all have very tight schedules for their games over there. And I think back there was just a little line drawing from Revenge of Mars up on his whiteboard. So this is Tom Eubann. He was a software engineer. He was the main architect for the underlying software for Pinball 2000. He also worked on Corvette and at least one other of George's games, I think. And he had a large electrical engineering background, and so this was the guts of a Pinball 2000 game, tacked up on boards and wired and mangled together for experimentation and testing purposes. And him and Brad Hume used to spend a lot of time in here with the soldering iron trying to make things work. Tom works for DirecTV now, actually. Him and another old video guy, Mark Guidarelli, both work for DirecTV. This was Louis Koziar's Lamenting the End of Days. That's the Wizard Blocks Whitewood on his right there. Louis worked on a lot of games. Me and Louis knew each other being pinball fans in Chicago for a long time. There was a period of time when Rec Games Pinball was actually readable and useful, and me and him and another local guy, Don Coons, all met on Rec Games Pinball, and we would all go and shadow the arcades where pinballs got tested and send reports to the Pinball News Group, and they called us the Beta Boys because we find the beta games, and that was really fun, and that was how I met a lot of people in pinball engineering, because they'd come out and take the audits off of the games and check to make sure that they were working and stuff, and we'd introduce ourselves to them. That's how I met Larry and Matt Coriel and Dwight and a bunch of other people. This is George and Pat standing outside of Lewis's office, and that Pac-Man over there on Lewis's door used to have a little thing that said how much of his code ROM was filled, which he used to keep track of his progress through games. And then that office was actually the office that I took over when everybody was gone. That was Lewis's whiteboard on that day of everything happened. And then next to Lewis was Scott Slomiani. Scott worked on damn near every Williams pinball from Party Zone on. He was a dot matrix artist. He did the art in the dot matrix for the games, and I think he had a hand in pretty much every game that came off the line from then on, including learning to do 3D art for the Pinball 2000 games. He designed a playfield at one point, which never got made, and him and Pete Piotrowski were going to design the fourth Pinball 2000 game, which they designed as a haunted house game, but then got rethemed as Playboy, and then, of course, got canned. Scott's a super nice guy. He works for Larry DeMar as well now. He's really, really creative. When I first went to Williams, me and Scott and Bill and Larry worked on a slot machine called Monopoly Advanced to Boardwalk, and had a ton of fun working with those guys. They were really, really creative and really cool. And Scott's just a really talented artist, too. I'm not sure where this video goes from here. Trying to remember what's left. I think we've hit all of the offices. Okay, so this is the other part of this. So after Pinball got shut down, everything that was on the floor started disappearing. And what we figured out that they were doing is that they cleaned out the electrical engineering and art departments and tore down the wall between them and started shoving everything back there. And that was all of Williams Pinball. All of the assets and everything were getting shoved back into what they were calling the archive room, and it was locked off and kind of locked away. Nobody was really allowed back there. All of this stuff is gone, of course, split up between Gene and Wayne, and who knows what's going on with it at this point. The whole dissolution of the assets of Williams Pinball is really depressing to me. I mean, it seems like they just picked all of the people who would do the most stupid and asinine things with it and sold it off to them for ridiculously low prices. And there's a lot of theories about why that is, and my favorite theory about it is that I don't think that Neil Nicastro, the CEO, could stand to see anybody else succeed with something that he couldn't make work. But you could ask a dozen people from Williams, and they'd have a dozen theories, and it's really hard to say. It was really sad to see all this stuff just sort of piled up and thrown in a corner like this. You know, just the history and everyone's hard work. I mean, the people that I worked with there were just stunningly creative, and they loved pinball from the bottom of their hearts. I wonder if I can turn the brightness up. See a control for it, so just roll through this. One of the things that got that I found in these boxes over there was a lot of drawings and playfield sketches and things. Coming down here on the right are all of the parts from the electrical engineering labs and the Whitewood labs piled up on top of each other. I think there's a lot of this. That's a box full of, when we would go to trade shows and stuff, they would hand out these plaques for the best game of the year and whatnot, and there was a whole box there of all of these plaques just kind of dumped into a box. Probably like 30 of them or so. So this is the Whitewood that got packed away for Wizard Blocks, and that Wayne has now, or Gene, or whoever ended up with it at this point. Yes, okay. You'll hear stories about Gene saying that he's going to make Wizard Blocks and build it up and make it work and sell it to you, and I don't want anyone to believe it for a second. The game was in a very, very, very rough state when it was shut down. It was flippable, and there were some basic rules. But I mean, in terms of a game that anybody would actually want to own, don't believe it for a second. This was it's sad that this is very dark. The whitewood for the last Pinball 2000 game, the fourth one called Playboy, that they were working on and also got shut down at the last minute. It was just barely flipping at that point. The boxes of the contents of people's offices, J-Pop's office, Lyman's office, Patla's office. I'm sure that Gene has all of this stuff in a warehouse down in Bloomington, Illinois somewhere. Oh, that's the box of plaques there. After Paul Barker left, he wrote Thanks for the Memories, Paul Barker, on this Far Side comic that was standing on the wall that I found when I went in there, because this used to be the art department, and this was sitting above what used to be his desk and got left there for whatever reason. And then this was the other part of the archive that got done. This was an office that was right across the street from across the hall from Steve Kordak's office. And one of the things that they had at Williams was bound up sets of every issue of Replay and Game Room and other industry magazines going back to the beginning of time. And that's most of what you're seeing there. But also on the right, you're seeing these filing cabinets, and that's where all of those old playfield drawings and stuff were from back in the day, from the old EM days and stuff from Williams. Apparently that stuff did get out, I hear, so that's very nice to know. We spent a lot of time looking through this stuff after Pinball was closed. I mean, me and Ted and Bill didn't get a lot of work done for a couple of weeks there. And this is just more photos from back in the archive area. I also put together I found some, let me see. I found some photos that I hadn't included with this when I first did it, that I put together a slideshow of. This is the Wizard Blocks whitewood. This is Ted in his office just before we left. These photos of the production line, me and Ted and Cameron one day went up on the day that the last game came off the line from Williams. It was a Star Wars Episode 1, and Ted Estes bought it. It was not quite the last game off the line. The deal was that Neil had made an agreement. Neil had made the factory people guarantee that he would get the last game off the line. And so what happened was that Ted got the last game that was sold off the line, and then Neil got the real last game off the line. And so me and Ted and Cameron and Bill went up that day that game was coming off to pick up Ted's game. And what he did was he had everybody in the factory sign the underside of the game. And so you can see all of these factory people lining up here, signing the bottom of the game, and there it is with all of the signatures on it. It was really kind of an emotional day. A lot of people who had worked at the factory for many, many years and were either laid off or kept on to make slot machines coming up to sign the bottom of this game. And everyone was very teary-eyed and stuff. It was kind of sad, but I'm glad that Ted has that game. He also got everybody in engineering to sign the the electronics cover, the white electronics cover board for his game. And so I think pretty much anybody who had anything to do with Pinball 2000 has their signature on his game. And there's a noteworthy photo back here, which I'll try to get to, which is this one of Cameron expressing his opinion of who got the last of that last cabinet off the line, which is the one that was going to Neil. And the rest is just some photos. There's J-Pop at his whiteboard. This one was already in there, I guess. Back in the Star Wars area. J-Pop and Cameron and Jim Sherd with a whitewood. This is more from that day, from Ted's game coming off the line. That says the last on the bottom, and they wrote it on there before the electronics all went in. That's Ted and Pat and Dwight on the day that Roadshow went on test. And I guess that's all I've got there. It was weird because there were 3 of us left on the floor who loved pinball who didn't get fired, of course. And in most cases, that wouldn't be the case. I mean, we all hoped in our hearts that the division would get sold and restarted again. I've got a couple of friends who still work there, and the building has been radically changed. They've really torn it apart down to the guts, basically. I mean, when they moved manufacturing out of there up to Waukegan, they had a brick floor that had been at the factory since the beginning, and they tore it up, and Dwight Sullivan actually got a bunch of those bricks and gave us all one. And thanks for coming. I hope it was enjoyable and interesting or whatever.